Hello and welcome to the Now Spinning Magazine podcast with me, Phil Aston. And I'm absolutely delighted to have as a guest on this particular show, Brendon Snyder.
So much.
Welcome, Brendon. You have a YouTube channel that is inspirational and also, I was saying just before we started recording, the amount of videos you have, your kind of new finds, your CD storage stuff, and of course the more recent ones where you're going in and out to record shops in your local area, they're just fantastic.
Thank you.
So welcome.
Thank you. My goal has been to basically share the love of music. I know that's what you're trying to do as well, and I built up this massive 12,000 CD collection over 35 years, and I just had all this knowledge rolling around inside my head, and I was sort of like, what am I going to do with it all? And so, I'm trying to put it to use.
And you certainly are. Well, today, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite bands, and I know it's one of yours as well. And this is Deep Purple. So those of you watching this will already see where we're going with the title. But what we're going to be talking about is the fact that Deep Purple, not that long ago, lost Steve Morse, but gained Simon McBride. They've also released a new track from their forthcoming album called Portable Door. And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to discuss how that compares with their 50-year legacy of great albums. This was Brendon's idea for this topic, and I think it's an excellent one.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a big fan of Deep Purple for a long time, probably not as long as you, meaning I got into Deep Purple in the very early 90s.
Wow.
I'd been aware of their material, prior to that in the early 80s, but I really came into music following and collecting and that sort in 89. So I don't quite go all the way back to the beginning of Deep Purple there. And, they lose Ritchie Blackmore in 93, but gain Steve Morse. And I was already a Steve Morse fan of his solo guitar. I've always been a fan of instrumental guitar work, and he was one of my favorites. So I thought, this is fantastic. And it actually led me into the band. I was not really following Deep Purple. Before that, I'd been into the glam metal and other stuff that was coming up in the late 80s, early 90s. And it blew me away. It introduced me to something else entirely. And of course, I went back and rediscovered everything with Ritchie Blackmore and Tommy Bolin, and going back even further to the original, vocalist and bassist in the band and so forth. And I think that's one of the key things here. As much as it saddened me that Steve Morse decided to step down, one, it was admirable for why he did it. So he wasn't fired. He didn't just quit for no reason. For those of you tuning in that don't maybe know the story, his wife had cancer, and he decided to take a step back from touring to be with her. And unfortunately, she passed away. But during the course of this, he just realized he couldn't put the time and energy into the band. And so he fully stepped away from the group. And I'm a little... that's a little curious to me in and of itself, and maybe we can touch on that later on, because he had already stepped down and had Simon McBride filling in for him at that point.
Yep. And
why he couldn't have just continued to do that for, year, 2 years, or however long. But after about, I think, 10 months or so, he said, I'm going to, step back and, let them move forward without me. But what I was trying to get to is, and you know this well, most viewers who know Deep Purple know this, they are a band that has constantly changed members. So whereas in some other bands, if you changed a predominant member like a guitar player, everyone would be up in arms over it. And this band has just changed members so often that I don't think this is nearly as big as it could be for some other bands. I don't know your thoughts on that part of it.
Well, I think there are pockets of the internet where it is a big deal. We've all seen there's no Blackmore, no Purple type posts. But right. I think what it's interesting about how you discovered the band, Brendon, is the fact that you carried no baggage like that.
Right.
When you discovered them, that a lot of this stuff had already happened. Mm-hmm. But you're right in many sense, because I remember the band when they first the idea of the band coming together with John Lord and Richie Blackmore was maybe they should call themselves Roundabout, with the idea that as it revolves, different musicians get on and off. So they'd almost kind of thought about this as a concept before they even thought of the phrase Deep Purple. But
That's interesting.
But I think the other thing about the band that's different is that everybody in the band has had a career outside of the Purple, whereas all of the big bands, apart from maybe prog bands like Yes, but a lot of bands where you know who the bass player is, you know who the drummer is, you know who the guitarist and the singer is, and no matter what lineup it is, you know who they all are. And I think that's another thing that makes them kind of unique, is that they're all personalities. Anyone who's ever joined the band has literally had their careers turbocharged as they've then gone on to form their own offshoot, etc.
Absolutely. And that's a good point that you make there, where, these different lineups and everyone knows who they are. I don't know many other bands that actually tag Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3 that follow the change in the members. In most cases, it's somebody came and somebody joined and it's just a continuation, but they really designate it and say, okay, this was a thing and now one guy's changed and we have a new thing. And tracking that, I think, has helped fans follow along with it and say, okay, they've lost some members before and they continued on and they made killer music and they've done it again, and let's see what comes out of them this time. And that's kind of the way I looked at this. Is sad as I was that Steve Morse was stepping down from the band, and like I said, I thought it was very admirable. So my heart went out to him, and I said, okay, I totally get that. I mean, how selfless is that, to give up essentially his career? Deep Purple, he'd been with the band for almost 30 years at that, not quite. And to do that, to take care of his wife, and it really just showed the amount of love that he had for her, and his humanity in that, even because he could have chosen to stay on the road and hired a health aide or something. But it made me like him even more. And when Simon McBride, came in to fill in, I didn't know too much about him, and he was just supposed to be a touring musician. But then when Steve Morse stepped aside, and even though they hadn't announced Simon McBride as the replacement yet, they took some time with that. I immediately started to, look into who this guy was. And I will say, at that moment, I had not heard who he was outside of him coming in as the touring band. But the thing was quickly as I did some research, I found out he was the guitar player on the Don Airey solo album. So I was immediately happy and elated, because I love this album, that I was like, okay, that's who he is. Now let's see what he can do in Deep Purple. And at the same time, then finding out that, because this was with the Don Airey band, excuse me, that he's part of this. So I thought it was kind of interesting that he had played with Don Airey, recorded original music with him, then played in Ian Gillan's band. I mean, it's the Don Airey band, but backing up Ian Gillan. So Ian Gillan, Don Airey knew who this guy was, and bringing him into the lineup wasn't just we need a touring guitar player, and you know what, just keep it going with him. I think they had really already gelled with him as a member, which gives me a lot of hope for this new album and lead single, Portable Door. I want to get your take on that first before I tell you mine.
Well, it's got elements of Pictures of Homing from Machine Head. It's also got elements of Gillan, like No Laughing in Heaven, and there's almost like a Tony Iommi kind of riffage with the main riff as well, which reminds me of Zero the Hero from.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's got that kind of feel to it, but Gillan's influence is to the fore, to his kind of phrasing and his kind of humor and the way he puts together lyrics. The guitar solo, because I see Simon McBride as being more bluesy, and I know some people say he feels like a more natural kind of fit than Blackmore than Morse, but actually, I actually think that the solo is sounds closer to Steve Morse than Richie.
I agree with that. I definitely think that the guitar playing, at least this first solo that we're hearing, is more in line with that than Ritchie or even Tommy Bolin
Yeah,
that's in there. And from what I was just holding up here, this is the only solo album I have by him, but
yeah,
I
same.
picked
Yeah,
this
it's the
one
only one I've
up.
got.
And it's far more bluesy. He is known as a blues guitar player, and that worried me a bit. I'm not the biggest fan of blues, and I didn't really want the sound of Deep Purple to change. But from opening track that's on here called Don't Dare, and then, of course, what we heard on the Don Airy stuff, it proves that he can rock. And certainly if he can come into Deep Purple and play the Ritchie Blackmore stuff and play the Steve Morse stuff that is extremely technical, then I know that there would be no problem, no matter how simplified his solo work might sound. He certainly has the chops and capability of doing sort of the more guitar histrionic type stuff that we're used to in Deep Purple. While not hearing that immediately on the song, I got to say, I think the song's really great. It's continuing on this resurgence that Deep Purple has had in the last, I mean, maybe it's now about a decade or so, but the
It is,
last
yeah.
three studio albums that they did, from Now What, and then Infinite, and this one, Whoosh, the last one from 2020, has got to be one of their best albums, in my opinion. I just absolutely love these, and they've kind of really grown into something else. And so I was afraid all that would shift, but this new song, I think, could have appeared on any one of those three albums easily.
I think it's interesting how a lot of fans, when they look at Deep Purple, they kind of zone in on a certain period, and
Right.
they just want that to be like, that's Deep Purple. But if you actually look at the progression of Deep Purple albums, even the ones from 1970 to 75-ish, they all progressed, and they are all their own. They all have their own identity. In rock, is very different to Fireball. Machine.
None of them are the same, isn't? They've never made the same album.
They've never made the same album. They've progressed, and they've tried new things out, and they don't always work.
Right.
But they've had lots. They've had soul and funk and all the rest of it. So, in a way, what they're doing now is they're moving forwards. They're not trying to recreate Machine Head or whatever. I think one of the kind of nets that keeps them kind of stuck is the live set. It always seems to be so much based around the Machine Head album, when really they have such a wealth of material. And I always felt that before Steve Morse said he was going to have to, unfortunately go and look after his wife, that there should have been even a Steve Morse set completely. They should have done a special few gigs where it was literally just that period of the band, because songs like, sometimes
I feel like screaming. I love that.
It should never have left the set.
Yeah, I agree. That would have been cool. It's unfortunate that they didn't. I mean, Steve Morse has a big name on his own. And I think in the fans of this later era, he was a big part and a big name within it. I mean, again, it was a huge shock for me that he was going to be out of the band, because I just loved what he brought to it. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of people that only look at certain eras, and in most cases we're talking about the Ritchie Blackmore era of the band, the two different time frames from the 70s into the middle 80s there, or even the little return that he did in around 93. But people are just looking at the Ritchie Blackmore part of this, and so had they done Machine Head in its entirety or a whole Ritchie Blackmore set, that would draw tickets, that would draw people in. To say you were only going to play the newer era of stuff from 95 on with Steve Morse, you and I would have been there in a heartbeat. But I think it would have turned off a lot of fans. Now, of course, if they had done it as, say, 2 tribute shows, and they had done them at smaller theater venues or something and promoted it as such, the last time to see Steve Morse as we say goodbye. And they could have even encored with 2 or 3 classic tracks. I think it should have happened. It would have been really cool, especially for the near 30 years that he had been part of the band. And again, he wasn't being fired. He wasn't just quitting. He was stepping down. And even now, I feel like he should come back out and guest with them, or they could do a couple shows now. As I mentioned, his wife unfortunately has passed away. He thereby is freed up and able to do other things. In fact, he's going out on the road doing solo dates and stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But I kind of had half hoped that when they didn't immediately announce Simon McBride, that the long enough period of time within that would have let the events unfold, that he would have been able to just return to the group. But here we are at a new chapter in the band. And from this first track, what's I think interesting with this is the interplay between Don Airey and Simon McBride, meaning the keyboards and the guitar in this. They follow each other so much that there's points in it I have to go, wait a minute, am I listening to the keyboard or am I listening to the guitar? But I think it's a really interesting thing. And I've noticed on the last 3 albums how much Don Airey has stepped up to the forefront in the sound of the band. And that hadn't really been the case with his stuff prior to it, in my opinion. He was kind of in the background, and now it seems like the keyboards are almost the dominant element. Certainly on What Now, there's more keyboards on that than guitar solos.
Yeah, and it's almost like their prog album, isn't it?
Right.
But I also think that if you go back to the Blackmore kind of Lord period, that Blackmore took a solo, John Lord did a solo. They were kind of separate silos. They did their separate bit.
Correct. They were very separate.
Where Steve Morse arrived, there was lots of those dual, really fast runs with John Lord and Steve Morse playing together at the same time. And this new track, to me, takes the spirit of the Steve Morse and John Lord kind of relationship. And obviously, as you say, Don Airey's been moving in this direction. And so the keyboards are really forward in the mix as the guitar is, because there's quite a few areas of the Deep Purple's back catalogue where John Lord is almost like, he's not a support musician, but he's kind of like he's further in the background than he was in the early days when he was really, the forefront. You've got to remember that John Lord for the Mark I and early Mark II was like the leader of the band. He was the arrangements, bringing the strings in and stuff, and it was all kind of keyboard orientated. And then Blackmore slowly became the more dominant force. But I think where we are now with Purple is it's balanced again. The classic Purple sound is Hammond organ and guitar, bass in the middle, and I think we have that.
We do. And I'm so glad that is there, and that we've got, Ian Gillan. He still sounds great.
Yeah, he does.
I think it's amazing. I don't know when the last time was you saw them. I saw them on the 50th anniversary tour that was wrapping up in 2019. And it's literally one of the best shows I've ever seen. Just the energy, the performance. I couldn't believe that at 50 plus years that, they were celebrating, that they could still put on a show that trounced most younger bands. And I got to assume they're still able to do the same thing out there. And that's probably one of the reasons why they have been able to continue as long as they have, is their live show, their live performance. Because it's not like Deep Purple ever had a tremendous amount of radio hits. They got the big Smoke on the Water, and they have a few other songs in there, and they had to come back in the 80s with Knocking on Your Back Door. But the only song that really gets played on the radio that people know is Smoke on the Water. And how have they made a career out of something back from, that was that 1972? So 52 years on, and yet this band is still pretty major out there. And it's got to be the live show and the live performance, because that energy is there no matter what. And it just blew me away.
I think as musicians, they're happy in their own skin, and they don't need to prove anything to anybody. And I think that I was at one of the gigs with Richie Blackmore, one of the last gigs that they did, the one that came out under the Hell and High Water tour, the Birmingham NEC, where Richie was not in a good mood at all and came on and threw water over the cameraman and truncated lots of the songs and was in a mood. And I think that the band must have been, they struggled really a lot that night to try and pull out all the stops to try and give a good show. And they don't have any of that drama now. They're all happy. They all support each other. And I think I think I suppose I'll miss that from the Steve Morse period, because he was always just grinning from ear to ear. He just looked like he was so happy to be there.
Yeah, exactly. That was one of the things I noticed, that, man, he was smiling the whole time through the show, which made me even happier. But I think, like you said, that rubs off on everyone else. And you're right. When you don't have, somebody in the band that's in a bad mood, or you're having to pick up the slack, so to speak, because somebody is in a mood. It's not even, you could have an off night, but man, Richie Blackmore would have attitude and take it out on the live performance, which hurt the experience for the fans. And I've never thought that was a cool thing. I think that's a real, jerk way to handle whatever it is that you're feeling, or whatever beef you're sort of having with your bandmates at the moment. Don't bring that on the stage. Go out, you do your show. You don't have to talk to each other during the show, and then work it out later. But there was a number of those performances. Yeah. The California Jam is another one of those famous, recorded performances that's caught that way. And I was relieved when he was out of the band and they brought Steve Morse in, because those final performances that he was doing in '93 were not good, in my opinion.
No, there's one, that album, Hell and High Water. I've got it here somewhere in front of me. There's the Stuttgart show, Anya, where he plays a blinder. That's the one. Anya off that is fantastic. It's about three times the length as the one off the DVD version. Yeah. And it's fantastic. But he's done that his entire career. And of course, in the 70s, I was only 15 when I first saw them on the Burn tour, and they played 2 nights in my hometown. And the first night, I went on the second night, and I remember going into school and saying, "Oh, wow, Richie Blackmore smashed the guitar up," and he was throwing all these shapes, and it was just fantastic. And he did this shredding bit of You Fall No One. And my mates who went the night before said, well, he didn't do any of that when we saw him. He only appeared once in front of the amps. Most of the times he was standing behind the amp. He was in a bad mood or something. So he's done it all the time. But of course, now in 2024, the age of social media, if social media had existed back then, he couldn't have got away with that for very long.
Right. Now, it would have been
everywhere.
Right. It would have been out a long time ago. It's true. Yeah, that's interesting to think about, that, not just him, but certain musicians like that carry those sort of egos and things. Yngwie Malmsteen is another one who fortunately has gotten his in check, since maybe the late 90s or so. But the stuff that they would do in the 80s that wasn't captured, because we didn't have camera phones and everything everywhere, they could get away with that stuff. But and maybe that's, the good vibes that had been in the band with Steve Morse, what he was able to bring, not only his amazing talents as a guitar player, but if you have someone who is a good spirit, a good person, who brings good energy to the band, it's going to make everything that happens better. And I don't know, maybe that's one of the reasons I love that era of him in the band, and those last 3 albums where, like you said, they're not trying to prove themselves anymore. They're going out and just making albums. They're not trying to make hits. They're not trying to come back with anything. It's just, here's us. Here's Deep Purple today. And it's been some of the best material. And I kind of hope that's what happens with this new album, that it's just, again, here we are today. We're not trying to be Steve Morse. We're not trying to be Richie Blackmore or some other era of the band. This is us now. This album here is supposed to be their final album.
Yeah.
And, right? They even did the song And the Address, a re-recording of that.
Yeah, complete. It came all the way around. And even the logo is from the Mark I, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought it was a fantastic album. I knew they were going to, they were doing the farewell tour and everything. And I thought, how cool, man. They're bringing it 360 degrees all the way back to the very beginning on this thing, doing it with the new guys that never got to play on that song. And they're closing out the album with it. I mean, it was just perfect.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
But then COVID happened. And suddenly everybody has free time. And this just shows you how cool Deep Purple are, because they said, let's not waste the time. Let's go in the studio and do something. Let's make another album. What can happen? Turns out it's a covers album. It's not original, but we got another album just because of how much fun they had making this. They said, let's just go do another one. And from that, going out and trying to finish the farewell tour and everything turned into, maybe we're not done.
The other thing I'd like to mention about Steve Morse, though, is he kind of re-energized a lot of tracks that had never really been played live, that Richie would never have agreed to. And I have to say, for those of you watching this, I haven't got anything against Richie. He's my favorite guitarist of all time. But he probably vetoed or had the final say on what was going to be in the set or not. And they would never have been able to do Pictures of Home or Fools or stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And Steve Morse's interpretation of those tracks, he had respect to what had gone before, but he also put his own spin on those songs. I mean, Fools with Steve Morse is a wonderful song. And of course, the Pictures of Home, took on a whole new life,
It did. You see that song being performed all the time over the career while Steve Morse has been part of the band. And I would assume that sort of stuff will continue with Simon McBride, because he comes in with even less baggage, of a major career or anything that people would generally know. And so him coming into this, he can play. Yeah, I'd love for them to throw a Tommy Bolin song in there or something off of, when David Coverdale was part of it. I think Ian Gillan would veto that, but
he would,
But I think it'd be really cool if they did a full, career retrospective, so to speak, live. Okay, you don't have to do a lot, Ian. Just, but throw in Burn, throw in one song from the Tommy Bolin era. I think that would be cool for fans. Iron Maiden does it. They do songs from the Blaze Bayley era when Bruce Dickinson was not part of it. There aren't a lot of singers that are willing to do it. Sammy Hagar did not like doing the David Lee Roth era stuff in Van Halen, although he would agree to 3 songs and 3 songs only. Otherwise it was all his material. But I kind of wish some of these performers would look at the legacy of the band and say, okay, the band has had a life outside of me, and this would be a really cool thing for the fans. Let's give them one, or I didn't get to sing on that album, but I want to give it my own spin. I want people to start thinking of me when they hear that song. Like, they could take an approach to it and do that stuff. I don't think it's going to happen, but that would be really nice, at least.
No, I know John Lord had spoken about doing something like that a long time ago, before the band even reformed, about doing some kind of special one-off charity event where each lineup of the band, because they were all still around then, apart from Tommy Bolin, and they would do some kind of special one-off gig. And I think they were going to show some footage of the Bolin era just to glue it all together. But of course, none of them would agree to do that in the end. But maybe it's a lead singer thing. Because I think, like Rob Halford, obviously, it completely ignores the fact that there was a period when Priest still continued, and Paul Rodgers doesn't, acknowledge that the other version of Bad Company ever existed. So maybe it's vocalists who don't like it.
Yeah, and I think too. I mean, the vocalist is the one generally who's writing the lyrics. In the case of Paul Rodgers, at least, he's writing music to it. So for him, he's performing a cover song of something that it's not something he wrote or was part of. If, I'm wearing, the Who, and so you've got Pete Townsend writing everything, and you don't have Roger Daltrey, generally contributing to that. So I don't think Roger, is concerned about what he would be performing, because he's a guy coming in and singing something. But when you have the singer that is as dominant as Ian Gillan writing those lyrics, coordinating or arranging, I should say, the music around the sort of syncopation of how it is that he sings those lines. I can understand where he's coming from within it. And, again, like you said, they don't need to prove anything. they don't need to do any of that to get fans to come out. They have continued to build a legacy long beyond Ritchie Blackmore and prove that no one member of the group is, the be all end all of Deep Purple, and they can keep going. And so it probably just comes down to nobody has to do anything they don't want to do. It is a full democracy. And, they do Hush, right?
They do Hush, but I think that's because I think Hush was in the it was a cover. It was in the set list.
It's a cover anyway.
yeah. I think Gillan never had a problem with that. But the other thing is, because I know a lot of people say, well, it's a cover band now. If they've, no John Lord, no Ritchie Blackmore, but it's the spirit of what the band represents, what the name represents. That to me, it's still valid of what they do as individuals. And also they've all been through lots of different experiences. Gillan went through the Gillan band and Gillan itself. And I feel his lyricism changed during that period, this kind of observational view he has on the world. And it's quite cynical and he's very clever with words. That came from that period rather than the early Purple stuff. And obviously Glover was with In and Out Rainbow, etc. And I think so they're bringing all that into the future. And also, like you referred to earlier, if Simon McBride had joined, I know if he was a different age, if he joined straight after Blackmore had left, I think that would have been very tricky for him. It would have been a different experience. But I think Steve Morse laid the ground for this really happy-go-lucky band, really chilled out, and he's just, as you say, he's already played with Don Airey and Ian Gillan and various things. So he's just put on his Deep Purple shoes and off he's gone, really.
Right. Yeah. When Steve, I felt this, at least, I don't know how other people saw it, but when Steve Morse came in, he brought his baggage, meaning, he had already had a career in the Dixie Dregs. He had already had a successful solo career. His guitar style was very distinctive. And people knew what they were going to get. He wasn't going to change and suddenly sound like Blackmore or something else. So him coming into the band, he brought that, but he also brought all those fans with him. And I think that Deep Purple needed a named guitarist. They originally asked for Joe Satriani. Right. And it would have been the same thing. We would, which I think in the end, he would have been a good fit too for the band. He just did not want the baggage that came from Ritchie Blackmore and having to step in those shoes and do it. So he turned it down. But here we have Simon McBride, where, as I said, most people don't know who he is or what he sounds like outside of it. But from his original work that he's done solo-wise, he is already sounding different from that. He is sounding as a rock guitar player, which outside of the Don Airey solo album, I don't know of any other projects that he's done where he put that hat on and played in that style. But he clearly can do it. He must have the love for rock music, blues music, and other things, and he's going to be able to slip in and out of that. The only thing I don't want is for there to turn up to be a blues song on the Deep Purple. I don't want, for them to change and do stuff like that. I want them to keep the Deep Purple style and sound that we're at least used to. They can continue to grow, but if they suddenly start morphing into a blues band, I don't know.
I think it's always been there, but it's kind of like hidden. You could say there's some obvious tracks like Lazy, Placing Line, or Who Do We Think We Are? But even though you don't really view them as blues rock as such. And of course, Morse.
You're not like Deep Purple. Sorry, Bad Company.
No, right. It's not. No, it's Deep Purple. But but they've got, they have like in their own influences, it's there, but when they pour it into the pot, it's Deep Purple. I mean, Steve Morse brought things to them like, jazz rock and, country picking and all sorts of things were poured into it, but it still sounded like Deep Purple. I mean, Perpendicular, when I first heard that, I just thought it was one of the best albums they'd done. It was so different, but it was so energized. It was so exciting, Rose's Cantina and the Aviator. It's like, wow, this is Deep Purple. It's great.
it wasn't formulaic. That was my thing that I saw in it. But by the time I was getting into that, I had already had Battle Rages on, Perfect Strangers, and Slaves and Masters. So hadn't gone far back in it, but I did know these other Blackmore era albums and was expecting one thing. He's very distinctive in his playing. And then when I heard Deep Purple with Steve Morse, I was elated because I could clearly hear the influence of Steve Morse. But as you point out, it was clearly Deep Purple. So it never became Deep Purple plus Steve Morse. It was, here's what I bring to the, melting pot, so to speak, and I'm going to throw it in, but everyone's going to season it in their way. And when it comes out, it sounds like Deep Purple. And I'm thinking that's what's going to happen here. Hearing this first track has alleviated all of my concerns that suddenly they were going to be a blues rock band or be something different. And no, I think it's just going to continue right on. They're going to continue to grow, and they're going to continue to be at the top of their game.
Yeah, and I think the track really grows on you, doesn't it? I think it's a great riff, the way they both Don and Simon play together. If I have one, it's not a criticism, it's an observation. It's too short. But it could easily go on for longer. So I'm hoping that that's kind of like a taster that when we hear the album, it's going to be exploratory. Like, now what? It's going to take all of that they've come from, but also Simon being the new kid on the block. Right. Maybe he'll be given, just like Steve was, and Tommy Bowling. It's like, this is a chance for you to introduce yourself to the fan base. So hopefully they'll be open to what ideas you've got. It'd be interesting to see how many there will be Simon McBride compositions in amongst it.
I hope there's a lot in that. I don't want him to just be the fill-in guitar player or the guy that is just doing the solos on it. If it's a Don Airey and Ian Gillan written song, and he's not providing riffs and things of that nature within it. So I do hope that he is collaborating with them, that they're giving him that space. I think they will. I think they're at that place where they're saying, again, they don't have the egos. It's let's see what happens. Let's do something new. I mean, they were going to be done with this album. So what changed? Did Simon McBride come in and re-energize them to say, hey, we got to go make an album with this guy. This is fun, And I hope that's what it was, because I don't think it was just a matter of, next album cycle, time to do it. They had said it was final, it was done. They were just going on the road. They could just play until they're done. They don't need to make any more albums. But they chose to go back in the studio.
I think it's going to be different. I don't think it's going to be blues rock, but I do think it will be different, because as you say, they've got nothing left to prove.
Right.
And for Simon himself, if he's he's not constrained, but obviously playing live, they can't really do new tracks, because obviously we live in the use of the internet, and someone will just steal it and it'll be all over the YouTube. Right. So he's having to, and he can't let go of Richie Blackmore's legacy too much. So he's playing within the boundaries of making sure that the Blackmore fans going, yeah, he's okay, this new guy. But he can't really be himself. So on this new album, this is a chance for him to do something that really sets it apart from any other album that's come out under the name Deep Purple. And to me, that is the essence of Deep Purple, is the fact that they progress. That it's a new album. It does not have to bear any allegiance to what's gone before, because it's guys who have been around a long time. They can be themselves, and they're going to have fun doing this. That's my hope for it.
And I think you're right, and that is a definite key thing with Deep Purple, that they have always been about exploring new things and letting people within the band influence what it is they're doing. You pointed out the soul and the funk that when Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale came into the band, Burn was a heavy album, but the follow-up, Stormbringer, outside of that one, the title track, it's a really kind of funky sounding album. It's like I want more of Stormbringer, but they went off in a whole other territory. And a lot of that was Glenn Hughes. Richie Blackmore wanted to follow that sort of thing, and that's why it went where it went. But it has shown that every time they bring new members in, it changes the sound. But I'm not going to say in a better way, and it's in a different way, but each one of these things is just really good. They haven't made a bad album. Come Taste the Band, the album you got behind you there with Tommy Bolin on it, man. That's my favorite Deep Purple album.
And I think, yeah, it's in my top 3 with Made in Japan and Burn. But I think what Come Taste the Band is probably the spotlight outside of Bolin and the rest of them is Ian Pace. Ian Pace's drumming on that is so inventive and so literally almost jazz rock. And he just plays like an absolute demon on that album. But this is also the band where we're so used to now with the bands going out with orchestras left, right, and centre. Deep Purple started that.
Yeah, I know. Was it 1969? They did
1969, and of course, even with Steve Morse, is it live in Montreux, 2011? I think it is. When they did Hard Loving Man with an orchestra, but they just showed the power of the songs, with an orchestra. So they've always, I feel, been pushing the envelope.
When they did Royal Albert Hall, I don't know if that was around 2000 or so.
Yeah,
and Steve Morse does the well-dressed guitar solo. Yeah. That is phenomenal. That is one of the greatest, lead instrumental guitar solos I can think of. And to have the orchestra back that, I couldn't believe it. That should have appeared on a Deep Purple album. That was so great.
Totally agree. It's a good point, actually. It probably shows how Steve Morse's respect for the guys and the band, that he didn't say, well, actually, guys, track 2 on side 2 is going to be one of my instrumental numbers. He never did that.
No. I'm sure if they had asked, he would have, gladly done one, but he didn't try to push that. And it shows that he didn't have an ego like that. And you're going back to what you're talking about with Simon McBride, making a name for himself on this album, introducing us to him. That is my only complaint on Portable Door, that I don't feel that guitar solo really blew my mind to say, wow, Simon McBride, I know who you are now. So I'm waiting to hear that on the album. And I kind of hope that he doesn't do the more safe guitar solo, even though I thought the solo for Portable Door fit perfectly. It was a great solo for that song for what it was. But I did fully expect the first song that we were going to get was going to have some real shredding or something on it that would have said, hey, this guy can keep up with Steve Morse, Richie Blackmore. Don't you guys worry. This is our new guitar player.
I wonder if it's because they're from the generation where when tracks were picked to be the singles, they always picked the song that was least representative of the rest of the album. So when Burn came out, they picked Might Just Take Your Life because they probably thought that maybe might get some airplay. Whereas technically now, you'd release Burn as the single because it's the one that's full on in your face with the riff. So I just wonder, it feels like it's not necessarily representative of what the new album is going to be like, but they probably between them say maybe this one will get more airplay or something cool. But actually, because that's my feeling. Whereas I think a lot of rock bands now would just go track 1, side 1. That's the one we're putting out. Unless they have a strategy where the next where there's 3, maybe they'll have 3 singles that come out.
I think they have a strategy for sure, but I will agree that first single from a Deep Purple album, in my opinion, almost never is characteristic of what the album is.
Totally.
Throw My Bones off of this album, which I think is a phenomenal song, is the only one that sounds like that on here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other good songs. The 2 other singles that they released off of this, which were all very unique, and all together sound like this album, but they're all very different. And I do think that they're still looking at it and saying, what is the song that is going to, again, I don't know if they can say, oh, it's going to get the most radio play, because things just aren't that.
They're not like that.
But when people hear it, it would have the widest appeal. And Portable Door may have just been that song. And for me, it was. I mean, I put that on from the moment it starts, I was hooked. It wasn't like one of those ones that I needed 2, 3 listens. I don't know about this. And then you warm up to it. This was like, yeah, Deep Purple's back. Everything melted away. I was like, this is so good. I want to know what portable door means, though. Is that slang? Is that British for something?
No,
Because
no. This is Ian Gillan doing his crossword puzzles, I reckon.
yeah, because I'm like, he says it goes in and out my portable door.
Yeah.
My portable door. I'm like, is he talking about his brain? And I kind of have interpreted it to be like in and out one ear. Right.
Yeah.
It comes in and it goes out. And he's got this door that he just gets rid of anything that he doesn't like or he doesn't need. And he calls it a portable door. I don't know if that's what this has anything to do with, but his wordplay is always so fascinating like that I can have that take on it. I'll probably later on hear Ian Gillan explain what the song is about. There'll be nothing about that. Right. But those kind of play on words and lyrical interplay back and forth allow so many different people to connect with it. Whether right or wrong, you've connected with it. And to me, that is art within the song. You can have lyrics that could mean 22 different things to people. That is far better than saying, I love Julie Brown or whatever. And it's like, there's no other way to interpret that. He has stated one thing and it's like, well, I don't know who Julie Brown is, so I'm not really into your song of this. But when they do it this way, I think it opens it up. And so maybe it was just the vagueness of the lyric, the cool guitar riff, the powerful organ that's there that they said, yeah, let's put this one out.
I also think, considering they're a band, apart from Simon, approaching 80, they look really cool in this video. They look like they look like they're really chilled out and they're really having a good time. Gillan, I always have a feeling that Gillan, someone's told him, well, we're going to do a video, and you can imagine rolling his eyes. But he looks like he's really into it. It looks like he's not thinking, oh, just going through the motions here. This is a new lineup. It's a new Deep Purple album, new guitarist. He looks genuinely connected and part of, and Glover especially. They all look great.
I'm trying to remember which one it was, and it's probably this album because it came with a DVD.
Yeah,
but one of them has the whole behind the scenes, or no, actually, it's the
Infinite, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Infinite. The actual documentary that came out for this was really insightful. Watching them work in the studio with Bob Ezrin, and that's another cool thing. The fact that this will be his fourth album in a row, this new one. With Bob Ezrin. So he's kind of become a sixth member to the group, but obviously working together with these guys, sort of pulling the best of the best out of them. But they really looked like in the studio, they were having fun. They were bouncing ideas off of each other. And when that rolls over into making a video or doing something else, it's just a continuation of that fun experience.
I remember that documentary really well because that's the one where Steve Morse he's struggling with his arthritis in his hand because of his style. But I remember there's one poignant moment in that DVD, and he says, I think someone says to him, what do you really hope for? And he says, I hope I'm the last guitarist that Deep Purple have. I think he says that line in that DVD.
I forgot about that.
And of course, that's not the case.
Right.
And of course, he's changed his guitar playing style, which just shows what a genius he is. And now he's off and running again. But I remember that because when he went home to look after his wife, I did hope that he would come back.
Right.
Now I realize that he's happy doing Dixie Dregs and he's exploring because he wasn't constrained in Deep Purple in any way. He still had his solo career, but I guess he can now really focus on that direction as he moves on through his grief, through losing his wife. And some McBride has come in, and as we said at the very start, he's played with Ian Gillan, he's played with Don Airey, and this is both parties are going off and doing what they want to do. Also, obviously, as you say, no one was fired, no one had a mood. It's just life.
Right. It was just life and all amicable in the end of the day. And whether or not they really hadn't yet decided on Simon McBride at the time, I think it was great that when they announced that he was stepping down, they did not say the press statement, our new guitar player is Simon McBride. I think they waited like 6 solid months, maybe even longer. I don't remember. But because I kept thinking, that because they didn't announce it and it didn't come within the next month or the following month, I kind of had wondered, are they going to go get a big name guitar player to come in and do this? Maybe even go back to Joe Satriani at this point. But when he finally announced it, it was sort of underwhelming because he had already been touring with them, and we all assumed he was going to become the new guitar player. But then when it didn't happen and got dragged out, so I think that, or I would like to think, that was out of respect for Steve Morse. We are going to say our goodbyes, and we are going to give people time to sort of grieve the loss of this fantastic member we've had for near 30 years. And down the road, when all of that kind of craziness and the news and the interviews and stuff has stopped, we will then come out and tell people who our new guitar player is. And fascinating that they did it with the announcement they were going in the studio. So at the time that they came out and said that, they said, and we're getting ready to go in the studio next month. And I was just like, wait, we're going to get a new album too? We're getting a new guitar player and a new album? I mean, I hope these guys go forever. I mean, what are they, 75 plus?
Yeah, Ian Gillan's 80, I think, this year, isn't he?
80? Oh, wow. So it's just like, I always worry, once the artists get into the mid 70s, it's like, how much longer do we have? And it's a morbid thing to think about and to say, but it is the reality. We're watching a lot of our musical heroes pass away. We just lost Dennis Thompson from the MC5.
Yeah.
Wayne Kramer was 3 months before that. And we had just lost John Barbata, if I say his name wrong, but, Jefferson Starship, drummer. And it just seems like every week there's another classic, well-known big band musician passing away. And I'm sure it's on a lot of people's minds. It's certainly on my mind, especially with these amazing bands who have made such great comebacks, or not even comebacks. Deep Purple's been around. It's just they really elevated what they were doing after Rapture of the Deep and Bananas, which I thought were great albums.
Yeah, me too.
But they were, by comparison to these three new ones, I think they're good, and these are superior. It was just like, I don't know what happened between those albums, which I still love, and where they are today. And I'm saying to myself, how does a band that's been around for 50 years do that? What's the change? Might be what you touched on, just that they're not trying to prove themselves. They're happy in their skin. And when somebody is happy in their skin, they're their true selves. And so they're more authentic in everything that they're doing.
I think kind of to finish on, really, they don't have to prove anything to themselves. Right. And actually, they don't have to prove anything to us.
Right.
Because as you just kind of said, we're just lucky that they're still here and they're still making music. And that doesn't mean they can release anything, but it means that I totally respect the fact that they're still doing it. I know that, I'm nowhere near their age, but even now I'm thinking, God, could I go on stage for 2 hours a night? Or I'd rather stay on the sofa. It takes effort to do this and sing those songs and write music and still have the motivation. They are inspiring people. And they have created so much fantastic music that I just want to see them do more. As you say, I just want to support them, and I can't wait for this new record to come out.
Oh, me either. This is one that I'm just literally counting down the days on until we get. And when it does come out, you and I need to get back together and review the album together.
Yeah. Oh, so that would be a great idea. Yeah, let's do that. We'll go through it track by track. Yeah, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. That would be a lot of fun.
Well, thanks very much, Brendon, for all of your time. This has been a fantastic conversation. Absolutely loved it.
I appreciate you having me on. This has been great fun. Like I said, let's definitely do this again. And for those of you watching, maybe we'll be back when the new Deep Purple album.
Yeah. And tell everybody where they can find your channel, Brendon, so they can check you out in case there's somebody out there that doesn't know who you are.
Yeah, right. No, I'm sure someone on your channel is new to me. Yeah. You can just simply find me under my name, Brendon Snyder. Phil, if you will, just put a link in your description below for my channel so people can check me out. But as Phil pointed out at the beginning, I do all types of things on the channel, everything from top 10 countdowns, album rankings, album reviews. I do a series called Let's Go to the Record Store, where I take you guys with me shopping. And I really started, it's become one of my popular videos. Everybody comments on it. And it was really out of the fact that I started watching record store after record store close. And I got really worried that they were all going to shut down at some point. And I said, I want to document them. I want to be able to go back at a later point and watch an experience like that, because I love so much going to a record store. And I started it up. I had no idea it was going to be as popular as it is and people were going to enjoy it so much. But I get all these people saying to me that they don't have a record store to go to, so they live vicariously through me watching that. Wow. And so I try to provide a lot of that on the channel, talking about how to store things, how to build racks like this, but just anything and everything. So yeah, come on by and check out my channel if you're interested. And certainly I would really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thanks a lot, Brendon, and we'll catch up later. Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye.
Have a good one, everyone.
Bye. Well, a huge thank you to Brendon Snyder for joining me on this podcast, looking at Deep Purple. It's going to be fantastic, isn't it? Waiting to hear what this new album's like. And as Brendon suggested, we'll both do a track-by-track review, again, back on Now Spinning Magazine, looking at the new album, which I think is called Equals One. You just feel that Ian Gillan, as he goes through life, he's becoming more surreal in how he comes up with these things. And I'm sure it's Ian that's got something to do with this. But anyway, that was fantastic. And there's such a lot of love for this band, and every lineup and every member of the band that's been in it has gone on and had their own individual career. And it was great to be able to talk about the Steve Morse period of the band as well in such detail. Absolutely love that. And make sure you check out Brendon Snyder's YouTube channel. As he said, just type in his name and you'll find it really easily. And I'm looking forward to going on to Brendon's channel in the near future as well. So thank you for watching and thank you for listening. Please check out the website at nowspinning.co.uk. Subscribe to this podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, click that little bell, and you can become a patron, you can become a supporter of our YouTube itself. And if you're on X, Threads, Instagram, Facebook, we have a Facebook private group and a Facebook page, and we're even on LinkedIn. Wherever you are on social media, so is Now Spinning Magazine. So take care. Remember, music is the healer and the doctor. Keep spinning those discs, and I shall see you all very, very soon.